Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got some really great tips to help you get your mix up and running, get it balanced really nice and quickly. These tips are going to work every single time. It's going to get you in the right frame of mind. So let's get straight into it. Just before we begin, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you know when the future videos are coming out. If you're looking to buy any equipment for your studio and you're based in Europe, please use my affiliate link up there. It doesn't cost you anything extra, it just means a little bit gets kicked back to me. You can also subscribe to my Patreon, that would help me as well. Link is down in the description below. Okay, so let's jump back to this mix then. Previously, I was looking at triggering the drums to get a nice drum sound. You'll see from my mixer here that I have turned off any EQ and compression that I've done after those triggers. If you watched that previous video, you'll have seen that I was kind of developing that mix a little bit further, but I don't want that present in this mix because I'm going to assume that we're working from the position of just balancing our mix. I'm not concerned with EQ and compression at this stage. So I've turned that stuff off. So my drum mix sounds like this. So that's a completely unprocessed drum mix, no EQ, no compression. That's just the raw sounds with the triggers from the kick, snare and toms blended in. So that's that. Now, today we're going to look to build the rest of this mix. We're going to look to balance the rest of this mix out. So I'm going to add in all of the other elements into this mix, one thing at a time, and make a really nice balanced starting point. Now, I will always start a mix with the drums. I think they're the backbone, they're the rhythmic kind of impetus to a track. So I'll always start with the drums. I think that's a really good place to start. After that, I'll always bring the bass into that context as well. Now, there's a great tip for getting the bass and the drums really nice and balanced. In particular, getting the kick and bass really nicely balanced. And it's called the VU meter technique. Now, you'll already remember that previously we talked about using the VU meter to trim different channels to hit that kind of 18 dB VU sweet spot. So I want to check first of all that I'm in that sweet spot. So I'm going to solo out the bass. I'm going to bring up my VU meter here and let's have a little look at where we're at. And you'll see that I've got the gain plug in here. I've done a tiny little bit of trimming there to pull it back. And I'm peaking at around minus 13 dB full scale on the peak meter, which is getting to around about 0 dB VU here on my VU meter. So my bass is in a really good place in terms of its gain staging. So that's great. My gain structure is good. Now, here's how I use the VU meter to balance my kick and my bass guitar. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solo out my kick channel here. Okay, here's my kick. Now I'm going to use the trim on the VU meter to trim this up so that the kick with single hits is bouncing around about this minus 3 dB VU mark. More or less. Obviously, there's some dynamic variety in that kick performance, so it's not going to be hitting that same mark all the time, but it's more or less in the ballpark. Then I'm going to add the bass into that equation. I'm going to bring my bass channel all the way down. I'm going to slowly introduce it. And when the two strike together, what I want is for the VU meter to be bouncing around the 0 dB VU mark. So with the kick on its own, minus 3 dB VU, and with the bass introduced, it's going to be around this 0 dB VU mark. Let's bring that in. Okay, so I've balanced my kick and my bass using this VU meter technique. I'm going to remove the trim. I'm going to bring the rest of the drum kit back in for context, and let's hear if that's in a balanced place. To me, that's a really good balanced starting point for the low end of this track. I can hear the kick, I can hear the bass. Neither one is too loud or too quiet. So in terms of setting up this balanced mix, that works really, really well. So as a quick refresher, that's the VU meter. I solo out the kick. I trim up the VU meter so that the kick hits are around -3 dB VU. Then I bring in the bass, and with the kick and bass together, I'm hitting around 0 dB VU on the VU meter when they strike together at the same time. Then, of course, just remember to return your trim back to 0 so that you haven't made your mix much, much louder, and away we go. Brilliant. Okay, so moving on then. The next thing that I'm bothered about is my vocal. Okay, now some people will leave the vocal until the very last thing to introduce into their mix. To me, that's a problem. Your vocal is arguably the most important element of a mix. Okay, so if you leave it until the end of the mix process to bring in order to be able to hear it, you have to then plonk it on top of the mix. That's not a good place for it to be because it's not going to sound like it's in the mix, it's just going to sound like it's on top. A much better approach is, once you've got your percussion and your low end in and balanced, then bring in your vocal, and then anything else that you bring in to supplement the vocal, you can sit underneath or around that vocal so that the vocal is already in the place that you want it from your balanced starting perspective. To me, that's a much better idea. Let's open out this vocal track stack that I've got here. I've got loads and loads of vocal channels going on here. I'm going to mute them all apart from the lead vocal. Now let's bring that into the context here. Let's go to this section here where there's a lot more vocal going on, and we'll introduce that and see where we are. Now, it's important to note here when we're bringing in the vocal, obviously, there's a lot of dynamic range in a vocal. When we come to mixing this further down the line, of course, we'll compress it, we'll even out the dynamic range, and then it'll sit in a more balanced way in the mix. So at the moment, we're just looking for a rough sweet spot where we think it's going to be in a good place moving forward, okay? It's not going to be perfect. Some bits are going to jump out, some bits are not going to be loud enough. That's fine at the moment. We're just looking to set up a balanced starting point, and where it is just there, I think works fine. That's good to me. Now I've also got this sort of harmony line, double track line underneath here, so I'm going to bring that in next. So let's bring that fader all the way down. Now, there's a kind of a magic number here with anything that's a double track, and that is to have it more or less 6 dB less than your lead vocal. So you see here I'm at -7.4, so I'm just about 6 dB less than where I've got the main vocal. That tends to be quite a good number, quite a safe number. That at least works for me. I like it. So that's always a good thing to bear in mind, a good number to shoot for. Now it looks like I've got other bits of kind of lead vocal distributed over these next 3 tracks or so. So I'm going to have a little listen to those, check those, and balance those as well. Okay, so let's bring in this vocal 3 next. Let's bring down these other channels here. Vocal 3 coming in. So that's a high harmony, so I don't want that being too piercing, too prominent, so I'm sitting that back a little bit more. This vocal 4, I believe, is a lower harmony. which is really just there, I believe, in this arrangement, just to kind of thicken and support, because the vocal's quite high, it's quite shrill and quite piercing. So they've done this lower octave just to kind of give it a bit more weight and texture. Doesn't need to be really far forward though, so I'm just sitting that back even further. So I believe that's most of my lead vocals done. I believe that's them sort of in the mix, which is fine. So I'm going to leave the vocals there. I'm going to come back to the rest in due course because I believe they're all sort of harmonies and backing vocals and they're less integral. The next really important thing to mention is this thing called mixing hierarchy. Mixing hierarchy is all about working out what's the most important elements of your mix. So when I'm balancing a mix from this perspective, it's a big rock track, it needs those big guitars. I need to bring in the guitars next because they're the next most important element. When you're balancing a mix, when you first bring up a mix to start working on, you need to work out what the hierarchy of that song is going to be. Is it going to be that your keyboards are going to be the next most important thing? Is it going to be that your string section is the next most important thing? You need to bring the things into the mix in the order of importance that they are, so that you can then balance things accordingly. If I were to bring in my keyboards here and then try and balance my guitars around the keyboards, it wouldn't work so well. So let's listen to the guitars that I've got, and I'm going to bring those in next. So it looks like I've got sort of two main guitar parts, two kind of main rhythm parts. I'm going to check my gain structure on each of them first of all. Okay, so trimming to hit the sort of 0 dB VE mark. Let's check on guitar number 2. Okay, same trim works. Now, clearly these guitars are meant to be offset. They're rhythm guitars, they're meant to be nice and wide. So although I'm not so worried about panning at the moment, I'm going to pan these hard. I'm going to get them wide, left and right, to leave myself some space in the center of the mix for the vocal. I'm also going to group these things because I don't want their volumes to be wildly different to each other. So I'm going to set up a rhythm group here, and I'm going to just have the volume and mute linked. So what that means is if I adjust the volume on one, it's going to adjust both. If I mute one, it's going to mute both. Okay? Now let's bring those into the context of our mix. Bring the level down. But if I had to better guess it. And do you hear how by already having the vocals in the context, I'm able to ensure that when I bring other things in, I'm not going over the top of the vocal. I can make sure that those rhythm guitars are sitting underneath the vocal, so the vocal's still in the place that I want it in the mix. So that's a really important thing to be aware of. Now, I've also got all sorts of other guitars, but for example, these tracks here, they don't actually have any guitar tone on them. They're just DI signals. So these need to be amped. They need to have an amp simulator put on them, or they need to be reamped somehow. So all of that stuff I can do in due course. Let's have a little look at the keyboards here. So let's go back to the beginning of the track where I've got these keyboard parts. Again, I'm going to check gain structure on these. So let's bring up a gain plugin again and our VU meter. Gain is already in a good place on that channel. Let's check the next one. Great. And we can do the same on the fourth channel. Okay, and let's bring those things into the mix. So here we go. Now you see I've got a signal coming out of synth 1. I can't even see any waveform. So what's going on there? So we see how quiet this channel is. So this is where our gain structuring is really important. Let's check our VU meter. You see, I'm not clipping, I've trimmed that all the way up by 24 dB, maxed out this gain plugin. I'm getting close to that 0 dB VU, and I'm still not getting anywhere near clipping on my channel. So that's why checking your gain structure is really important. Let's bring that into the context. I'm going to mute these other synth channels again. You hear how that's a little bit unbalanced, that channel. It's a bit left-sided. I don't like how it kind of feels like it's leaning over. So I'm going to change this to a stereo pan pot, and I'm going to adjust it until I feel it's kind of in the center. That feels better to me. That feels more centrally focused. Okay, we've got this piano that comes in at this point here. So let's check this piano out. Again, we'll check our gain structure. As always, let's solo the piano. Okay, let's bring it all the way down and slide it in. Let's mute these guitars here, which haven't got a sound on them. Cool, and you see by working in this way, I've got most of the elements of this mix in now, and you see where my mix bus is. I'm peaking at minus 5.7, so I've still maintained that kind of 6 dB of headroom throughout this mix. And the great thing about working in this way with everything in buses and track stacks is, if I think, oh, actually I'm getting a little bit hot on my output, what I want to do is turn everything down, I can just go to all of my buses and I can just bring them all down a bit. And then I'm gain staging my kind of mix bus in a really nice and simple way. So I'm going to go back through this. I'm going to bring in all the rest of the elements of the mix. I'm going to put on some guitar sounds to those guitars that don't have any instrument sounds on them. And we'll be back with this kind of balanced mix ready to show you. So I've been through the whole project and I've just balanced all of the elements. So you can see, for example, if I open up my vocals track stack here, every channel's got a gain plugin on it. I've trimmed as appropriate according to the channel. So some channels have been trimmed, some channels haven't needed any, some channels have been trimmed a lot, some channels just a little bit. And then I've obviously balanced my mix using the faders. So let's just hear a little bit of this. I'll skip through some different sections. So what we should hear is, although obviously there's going to be many issues with this mix in terms of equalization, in terms of things needing compressing, in terms of things needing panning, you should be able to hear a balanced starting point from which to then progress with this mix. Let's have a listen. Skip on a bit. So the mix is really, really balanced. That's a great place to start the rest of your mixing process, moving into equalization, moving into compression, moving into panning, all those other things. Now, if you found that this method of working is a little bit tricky, or you want to just try something different, I've got one other bonus tip for you. We're going to try something called the pink noise technique. It's very simple. What we do is we set up a new audio channel. Okay, now on that channel, I'm going to place a test oscillator. Now in Logic Pro, it's in the utility section, test oscillator. It's going to beep at us straight away. I'll turn it off. Okay, so it's going to create a test oscillation tone. What I want to do is set this to pink noise. And likewise, I'm going to trim this on our VU meter. So let's grab our VU meter here. Now I need to make sure that I've put that channel going out of my mix bus. And let's trim pink noise. So you'll see that I'm around about 0 dB VU with my pink noise generator. Now what I can do then is to adjust the relative level of anything so that it's just audible around the pink noise. And that should, in theory, if I do that with every channel, create balance for me. It's not a very nice process to listen to, but it does work. So let's solo out some things at a time. So let's start with these guitars here. For example, let's solo them out with our pink noise and adjust the level. Now you can hear that they're just audible above that pink noise generator, which is a really good sort of reference point to know that they're at a good place in our mix. And we could apply that same method that we've just done with the guitars on anything in our mix. So we could go to, for example, our lead vocal, and we could solo that against the pink noise and see where that is. And you can hear it's just audible over that pink noise method. Now, clearly, it's not going to be perfect because some things in your balance you're going to want to have quieter than others. So if you just set everything at the exact same relative level, you're then going to need to adjust things afterwards. But it does give you a good kind of reference point to think, okay, how can I get things loosely in the right ballpark? So that's a cool little technique to try, the pink noise technique. Not very nice on your ears, but it does work. Okay, so that's it for this session. I'm going to be back for you very soon with the next one. If you haven't already, please give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, and I'll see you again very soon.